It's recording, so we have something to post. Okay, so we are starting the urinary system. And in my opinion, the urinary system is really cool. But it is, so anatomically speaking, I'm going to move you guys back over here so I don't look like I'm looking off at the wall. Anatomically speaking, what the heck? What's happening in my world? Okay, stop that. Sorry, I'm having a day. Anatomically speaking, this is probably the easiest system, right? It's very basic. You've got your kidneys, you've got your ureters, you've got your bladder, and you've got your come on, brain. My brain just shut down. Urethra. It's another U. So that's your major structures, right? In terms of gross anatomy, right? Now, when we get further into the kidneys, we're going to find that there's more anatomy within the kidneys. This is just like the heart, right? Where I told you guys when we did the cardiovascular system that I was going to test you on the heart anatomy in lab and the heart physiology in lecture, but that in order to understand the heart physiology, you had to understand the heart anatomy. The same is true of the kidney, right? If you don't understand how the kidney is put together, then understanding how it functions is going to be really difficult, okay? So it's really important that you spend a good amount of time making sure that you understand where all of these things are that we're talking about, how they're connected to each other, and how all of the sort of actions that we're talking about, the physiology that we're talking about, how it all relates to that anatomy, okay? This is another one of those situations where drawing things out will be hugely helpful to you. Actually, there is a diagram that I'm going to give you guys, and I'm going to give it to you today. I will post it on Blackboard. Actually, it may already be on Blackboard, and I just haven't made it visible to you guys yet. Hang on one second. Let me double check. Hang on one second. And I have not forgotten that I owe you guys an extra credit assignment for exam 3. That will be going up probably this afternoon or tomorrow. Okay, let's see. Yep, urinary system. In here, it's not in there. Okay, I think I've got that set up in next week. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, so in next week's assignment folder, there is an assignment called nephron function. Okay, now we are going to be talking about that in detail next week, but there are pieces that we're going to be talking about sooner than that. And what I want you guys to do is I want you to read this assignment. It breaks down exactly what it is that I want you to do. And I want you to print out this handout, and I want you to work through the activities that I've given you for that particular assignment. I want you to start it this week because I want you to have lots of time to talk to each other about it, to try to figure out where things are supposed to happen and what's going on where within the nephron, okay? So I want to give that to you now, but you will find it specifically in next week's folder because that's where you're going to get the key, and that's when we will be talking about it in detail in class. But I want you to go ahead and start it now. Does everybody understand that? Okay, cool. So Does anybody have any questions about sort of the major functions of the urinary system or anything that's on this particular slide? So it's really important as you're working through the urinary system that you think about these functions that are listed here. I don't have my Apple Pencil over here, so we're just going to do this with my finger today. So when you think about the functions that are here, I want you thinking about them in terms of, okay, where are these things happening within the kidney? Because we're going to talk about a lot of this. How are we regulating blood volume and pressure? How are we regulating solute concentration? How does the kidney have an effect on the pH in the extracellular fluid, so outside of the kidney in the interstitial fluid? How do we regulate red blood cell synthesis, and where does vitamin D synthesis come into this process? Okay, so you want to be thinking about these. Don't just memorize this list of functions, but think about it in terms of where things are happening and what's going on. Okay? All right, if nobody has questions about this, then we're going to move forward. Okay, questions here. So this is where we start to get into the inner anatomy of the kidney. Okay. Does everybody understand where all of these different parts and pieces are and how they interact? Where have we seen a hilum before? Anybody? Who can tell me what a hilum is? Can anybody tell me what system we're studying today? Cameron. Oh, hang on. I can't hear you. What's happening? Mute. Okay, try again. Nope, hang on. Something is not working. What is happening here? Seriously? Why do I not have sound? You guys can hear me, right? Oh, I did it again. Okay, now try. Yes, my headphones again. Thanks, Hannah. Okay, try again. Cameron, are you talking? Why can I still not hear you? Okay, I pulled the headphones out. What is happening? Switch audio. View audio. No. Guys, I am having a day. I don't know what's happening here. What's happening? Why are you being difficult? Headphones are not plugged in. Let's switch to this. Okay, try now. Nope. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna switch my audio from my computer to my iPad because that should work. Here are options. Switch system setting, text, no. Oh, that worked. Okay. Try now, Cameron.
Hello?
Ah! Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, guys. This is just going to be one of those days. Have you ever had one of those days where you're just a hot mess and no matter what you do, you're just a hot mess? That's my day. Okay, so which question were you planning on answering, or were you asking one?
I was just going to say that the hilum that we've seen before in the liver, it's an indention, and it's kind of a collection of tubules like the artery, vein, and in this case, the ureter.
Yes, we have. We've seen one in the liver. We've seen one in the kidney. There's actually one other organ that we've seen them in. Yes, Hannah. I don't know if you guys saw that in the chat, but Hannah said lungs. The lungs also have a hilum. So the hilum is basically where all of the important vessels and veins and tubes enter or exit an organ. Okay? So all of the blood vessels that come into or out of the kidney come in through the hilum, and the renal sinus is the sort of the big open space that's inside of there, and then you have the renal pelvis that sort of empties out into the ureter as it comes out. So do you understand what the difference is between the cortex and the medulla? So which is thicker, cortex or medulla? Let's make that a participation question. Which one is thicker in the kidneys, the cortex or the medulla? Who wants to take a shot?
The cortex.
That would be true in the adrenal gland, which sits on top of the kidneys, but in the kidneys, it's actually the opposite of that. So if we blow this up, let's make this bigger. And we, whoops, hello, give me my little guy. What happened? Let's try again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so if we blow this up and we look at the kidney really close up, this piece right here, I'm going to make it green because I think that will help. This piece right here, that's your cortex. Okay? Very little cortex. Okay? It will come down sort of into here. Okay? But it doesn't extend past these big structures here. Okay? So the cortex is much thinner, much smaller than the medulla in the kidneys. Okay? The medulla contains a lot of really important structures, like the renal pyramids. So these structures that I circled, I was looking to see if that was a hand up. These structures that I've circled here, those are your renal pyramids. Okay? They are cone-shaped, and at the very bottom of each of those pyramids, you have this little pocket right here. Okay? That little pocket is the renal papilla. Okay? The renal papilla is basically in between the minor calyx and the renal pyramid. Okay, are you following it? So far, so good? Okay, so the minor calyx attaches to the major calyx, and they're just listed as a calyx on this diagram. We'll get into more detail in a little while. And then the major calyces, which is the plural, merge together to form the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis. And the renal pelvis empties into the ureter. Okay? Now, all of those structures are important because all of those structures are what you need to understand in order to follow the path of a drop of urine through the urinary system. Okay? So we are going to get all the way down into the tiniest detail of how we make a drop of urine. Okay? But for now, we're going to start with sort of the larger structures. Okay? So, does anybody have any idea where urine is actually produced in the kidneys? I mean, I assume everybody knows that the kidneys produce urine. That's sort of standard, right? That's like third grade anatomy. The question is where? What would we call sort of the major machinery in the kidneys? Anybody have a guess? Back here. It's in between the renal pyramid and the minor calyx. Okay? So, here for a second. Okay. So let's talk about the and beyond. Okay, I'll put this picture back up here again. Now, and I'm going to erase all of this. All of this go away. Okay, now. Oh, thank you. We have gone through our collecting duct down into our renal papilla, right? From the papilla, we go into the papillary duct. Through the papillary duct to the minor calyx. Now, from the minor calyx, where is that drop going to go?
Major calyx?
To the major calyx, yes. From the minor calyx to the major calyx. Okay, the major calyx is this big area here. You see one here, you see one there, you see one there, you see one there. So minor calyces empty into major calyces. Okay, the major calyces empty into what?
Is the renal pelvis next?
Yes, it is. So all of these are going to enter into the renal pelvis. Okay? From the renal pelvis, we're going to go out of the kidney through a tube. A very long tube. Anybody know what that tube might be?
The ureter?
The ureter, yes. So we're going to go out the ureter. And then we're going to go where? Where does the ureter go?
The bladder.
To the urinary bladder. Okay. And there's two, right? There's one that comes from the left too. Okay. And once the urine is in the urinary bladder, it's going to leave the body through what?
Urethra.
Through the urethra. Okay. Don't confuse your ureters and your urethras. And for the love of everything known to man, do not tell me that a drop of urine exits through the vagina. I have had it happen. Those are two separate holes, and if you're not aware of that and you're a female, get a mirror. You guys need to know your own body. I'm not kidding. There's nothing scarier to me than nurses that can't tell me where a drop of urine goes. Okay, so participation question. Let's see how much attention you guys were just paying. Give me the list of structures that a drop of urine will pass through, starting with the collecting duct. Write it down, and then when you think you have it, raise your hand on WebEx. The nephron, yes, Hannah. So the nephron is what we call the functional unit of the kidney. The nephron is where all of the exciting stuff happens. All of those other structures that we just talked about, they are literally just tubes that carry urine. All of the structures that you know of, right? The ureter and the bladder, all of those things just move urine from one place to the next in order to get rid of it. Okay? The nephron is where all of the work takes place in the kidney. Okay? It's also the histological unit of the kidney. So when we look at kidney tissues, we're really paying attention to what's happening in the nephron. Okay? So when you look at a nephron, we know that we've got 4 major structures, okay? And you need to understand these structures. And I like this particular diagram because a lot of the diagrams, including the one that I've given you to label, sort of stretch the nephron out so that you can really pay attention to each of the different segments. But this particular diagram shows you how much overlap there can be in some of these segments. Okay? So when you think about how this thing is structured and oriented, and we start talking about movement of materials between the nephron and the capillaries, this is a good image to keep in your head because you can see where the capillaries come into close contact with the tubules. Okay? So the parts that you need to know of the nephron. Okay? I feel like I'm doing more lecturing today than normal. I feel like I need to stop doing that. I get a lot of head shaking no when that happens. So okay, so let's do this. I'll walk through this and we'll walk through the urine, but then we're going to move back into this question and answer section a little bit more. What time is it? 30. Okay, so 4 major parts of the nephron. Okay, you have the renal corpuscle. Now you will hear the renal corpuscle referred to in, I don't know, 4 or 5 different ways. Okay, you'll hear it referred to as the Bowman's capsule. You'll hear it referred to as the glomerulus. Okay, so really the combination of the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus make up the renal corpuscle. So what we're talking about is this piece right here. This little guy. Okay? Now, blood comes into the renal corpuscle and blood goes out of the renal corpuscle. Okay? And we'll talk about the in and out vessels later. But once blood has been filtered in the renal corpuscle, the filtrate, the materials that are pulled out of the blood, move directly from the Bowman's capsule into the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, now, in A&P1, we learned what proximal means. Who remembers what proximal means?
When we were learning about the body and like the limbs, like the arm, so the proximal side of the arm would be closest to the medial or to the body.
Well, yes, so closest to the joint, closest to the connection, right? So in terms of the nephron, proximal would mean closest to the renal corpuscle. Okay? So if there's a proximal convoluted tubule, then there's probably also a what? Distal convoluted tubule, right? One's close, one's far away. Convoluted. The easiest way to remember convoluted is wiggly. It's not straight. Okay? It's the closest wiggly tube to the renal corpuscle. That's your proximal convoluted tubule. Okay? And the distal convoluted tubule would be the farthest away wiggly tube from the renal corpuscle. Okay? From the exit. So, right? So they look like they're really close together, right? But if you look, this is sort of the exit point from the Bowman's capsule. So your proximal convoluted tubule is here, and your distal convoluted tubule is over here. So it's way far away from the end of the Bowman's capsule. Okay? In between the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule is the loop of Henle. Okay? And the loop of Henle drops down into the medulla of the kidney in some cases, not in every case. We'll explain the difference between those later. But you'll notice when you look at the loop of Henle, there's a part of it that goes down and there's a part of it that goes up. And you'll also note that there's a part of each of those that is fatter or thinner, right? So you have a thick descending loop. You have a thin descending loop. You have a thin ascending loop and a thick ascending loop. Okay? All of those things are named really well. Those pieces are the major pieces of the nephron. So like I said, anatomically, this is pretty simple stuff, right? It's not all that complicated. The words can be a little scary sometimes, but it's pretty straightforward stuff. Now, they all connect to this collecting duct. The collecting duct is not technically a part of the nephron. Multiple nephrons will connect to a single collecting duct. Okay? So while you will see the collecting duct in almost every diagram of a nephron, they are not actually part of the nephron. Okay? Now, when we're talking about the path that urine travels, okay, you're going to start, we're going to make urine in the nephron. Okay? So that you don't have urine. Urine does not exist until it gets to the distal convoluted tubule. Okay? From the distal convoluted tubule, urine will enter the collecting duct. Okay? That collecting duct goes through the renal pyramids to the renal papilla. That's that little space, right? Where's the renal papilla? I told you guys it was between two things.
I know it's before the minor calyx.
Mm-hmm.
And after, well, the collecting duct?
No. Well, yes and no. So it's in between when you're looking at the gross anatomy of the kidney, right? If we go back, the collecting duct is going to go through that renal pyramid to the renal papilla. Okay? The urine is going to leave the collecting duct, go into the renal papilla. From there, it's going to go through a papillary duct. Okay? Series, a little tiny hole that will take the urine into the minor calyx. Now, based on...
Okay. I found this on the web.
Stop talking to me.
That will take me.
Shush. My phone is having a little temper tantrum today. Now, this says minor calyx and beyond. Does that mean you don't need to know the beyond part? No. No, that's not what that means. That means this is the very beginning part of this path. Okay? So you need to know that part. We're going to talk in more detail about how urine is actually made later. But for now, you need to know collecting duct to renal papilla to papillary duct to minor calyx. Okay. Hang on, I want to see something. Put your hand up when you get it. Got two. Give you guys just another minute. There we go. Now they're starting to come in. Okay. Let's go with Sophia. Why don't you start, and if you get hung up, then we'll get somebody to help.
The collecting duct to the renal papilla.
Exactly.
And then to the papillary duct to the minor calyx.
Yep.
Okay. To the major calyx, to the renal pelvis, and then the ureter, to the urinary bladder, and out the urethra.
Excellent. Excellent job. Okay, so everybody has that? I did mention that was a participation question, right? Yes? So make sure that you include that in your list. Okay. That is really important for you to know. That will come up in the exam. I can virtually guarantee it will come up at least once, if not more than once. Okay? So you need to know that path. Make sure you understand it. But don't just memorize the path. Like I said, make sure you're looking at that anatomy and understanding how these structures work together. Okay? Now, I was telling you that the loop of Henle sometimes extends really deep down into the medulla of the kidney, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay? And we actually distinguish between types of nephrons based on how long the loop of Henle is. Okay? So you have two kinds of nephrons. You have juxtamedullary nephrons. So juxta means to cross. Medullary refers to the medulla. So the juxtamedullary nephrons are the ones that go all the way down into the medulla. They almost entirely cross the entire medulla. So you're looking at, for instance, this guy here, okay? And you see how long that loop of Henle is that extends all the way down there into the medulla. And then you have your cortical nephrons. Now, cortical nephrons do extend into the medulla. They just don't go as deep, okay? So this nephron ends much shorter than the other one does, okay? The other piece of information that's really useful on here is the explanation of what exactly the renal corpuscle does. Okay, so as we go through this process, you're going to find out that there are three major functions that happen in the nephron. We filter, we secrete, and we reabsorb. Okay, they are three very different functions, and they all happen in very specific places. Filtration only happens in one place. It happens in the renal corpuscle. Okay? So in the renal corpuscle, which is the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus combined. So think of the glomerulus like a spaghetti ball of capillaries, and the Bowman's capsule as like a little case that wraps around them. Okay, those two things together make up the renal corpuscle. Does that make sense? You guys following me? Yeah. Okay. Which is exactly what I was just talking about. Okay, so given all of the stuff that we've talked about today so far, does anybody have specific questions about the renal corpuscle? So when you look at this, so if I were to ask you which blood vessel is the vessel that carries blood into the renal corpuscle, and which one carries it out?
The afferent arterial carries it in and the efferent carries it out.
Yes, the afferent arterial carries it in and the efferent carries it out. And I say those that way because it's really easy to confuse them, right? I always sort of stress the A and the E. Now, if you had me for A and P1, when we talked about the nervous system, we also used the words afferent and efferent. And what was the tool that I gave you to remember which one was which? Afferent means things do what? Arrive. So afferent is always going to be coming in. Efferent, which is where things exit, is always going to be something leaving. Okay? In this case, it's coming into or leaving the renal corpuscle. In the nervous system, it was into or out of the central nervous system. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. That's really all the detail you need to worry about here. Actually, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say not. There are two things. There are two things on here that I want to point out that we will see again. There are these little tiny cells that are around and across the blood vessels. Okay? That's the juxtaglomerular, and I can't remember the rest of that, but it'll come up in a minute. I just want you to pay attention to it, that it's there. Okay? The names are escaping me at the moment. It's a very long word. I'm not going to ask you to remember the word. I just want you to know what they do. Ow. And I want you to pay attention to this space in the Bowman's capsule. Okay? That space is going to play a really important role in the process that's going to take place within this renal corpuscle, which is what? What is the major process that takes place in the renal corpuscle?
Filtration.
Filtration. What are we filtering?
You're filtering stuff out of the blood.
Yes, exactly. The goal here is to filter all of the stuff out of the blood that we don't want to keep in the body. Okay? And that all happens here. So as blood travels through these capillaries, almost everything actually will get filtered out of that blood. Okay? We'll talk about the details of that in a little while. Now, they did in this other picture. Hang on. Why are you not letting me do what I want to do? There we go. Copy. When we talk about the Bowman's capsule, there are a bunch of different cells and structures that there it is, the juxtaglomerular apparatus. That's the word I couldn't remember. My brain. Let's zoom in on this. Okay. So this is a closer up view of what we just looked at, right? So what do you notice about the capillaries in this view that you couldn't see before? So they look bigger. They're not really bigger. It's just the way that this is drawn. But do they look the same to you? Paste. Do they look the same? What looks different about them?
They're enclosed.
They have little cells wrapping around them, right? They have little cells, and those little cells have little feet, okay? And we're going to talk about what those feet are in a little while. But I want you to sort of get this visual in your head, right? I want you to pay attention to this visual. We have our Bowman's capsule, and within our Bowman's capsule, we have this space, okay? And we also have these odd looking little capillaries, okay? Now, when we were talking about capillaries a few weeks ago, there were some special capillaries, and one of them was a kind of capillary that I told you we were going to see in the kidneys. Anybody remember what that was? Remember fenestrated capillaries? Capillaries that had little spaces in them that allow things to diffuse easier. That's what we have here. We have fenestrated capillaries. And it's going to become really important later for you to remember that. And it's something that you can sort of visualize a little better by seeing them like this. So I'm going to move this over here out of the way. So we have our fenestrated capillaries with our little cells wrapped around them. Capillaries enclosed by podocytes. That's what we're going to call those little cells that we wrap around them. We have our afferent arteriole coming in. And what is wrapped around that afferent arteriole? Think back to the blood, to the circulatory system. What do we find before capillaries? What controls blood getting into or not getting into a capillary?
A sphincter.
A sphincter, a precapillary sphincter. Okay, that's what you're seeing there, right? If that capillary closes down, then you're not going to get as much blood into that sphincter closes down, you're not going to get as much blood into that capillary. And if it relaxes, you're going to get more. Okay? I also want you to notice that there's a sphincter around the efferent arteriole. Okay? Now, this is a feature primarily of the kidney. Okay, this is not a normal thing coming into or coming out of capillary beds. Okay, the purpose for that is if blood pressure is too low in the glomerulus to get the filtration that we need, that capillary sphincter can close or constrict to increase blood pressure in those capillaries. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm just pointing out these structures to you because when we get to this process, if you have this image in your head, it will help you to better understand what's going on. Okay. The other thing I want you to pay attention to, and I pointed these out a minute ago, are the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay. There are juxtaglomerular cells, and then you have the macula densa. And the macula densa are attached to what?
The distal convoluted tubule.
Yes, they are attached to the distal convoluted tubule. Again, something that we are going to talk about because this is going to play a role in part of the physiology that we're going to talk about. I'm just trying to get you to see and understand sort of where this anatomy is so that when we start talking about the physiology associated with these structures, you've got a visual in your head. Okay? Okay, I think this is going to be the last slide we're going to cover today because it's got us about halfway through, and we'll finish this PowerPoint on Thursday. But I do want to talk about these fenestrated capillaries. So remember we talked about these fenestrated capillaries and the fact that they have those spaces, those openings that make it easier for materials to diffuse across the membrane. Okay, well, we don't want things necessarily moving all the time, right? So these podocytes, these little feet on these cells that wrap around, that wrap around the capillaries, cover up some of those fenestrae so that materials that are diffusing from that membrane have to get through not just the membrane but also the little podocytes of the cells that surround them. So it's sort of an added layer of protection against things moving too fast or moving that we don't necessarily want to move. Do you see how that would help? Sort of like a little filter on a filter. Yeah. Okay. So when we meet on Wednesday, we'll go through the rest of this PowerPoint. which will include a little more anatomy on the, where am I? On the glomerulus and the arterioles. We'll talk about the renal. This is all blood vessels. Nope. We're going to go back to the tubule itself, some of the arteries and veins, and then the histology of the ureters and the bladder. You should be looking at the nephron assignment and using that assignment and using the information that we've talked about already to help you start to think about what's going to be happening in that nephron. Okay? The nephron physiology can be very complicated. And so I want you thinking about it now, even though we're not actually talking about it till next week. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about any of this?
Are we gonna walk through the nephron?
Oh yeah, we're going to walk through the nephron completely next week.
Okay, so we do it like in a rough draft and then we can.
Yeah, so again, this is sort of like the assignment that I gave you guys for the cardiac cycle. I'm giving it to you now so that you are thinking about it and processing it and trying to figure it out yourselves. I'm not grading what you turn in on accuracy. I'm grading what you turn in based on did you put effort into doing it. The accuracy will come when I test you on it on the exam, but we will go through, I will give you a key that will tell you everything, and we will walk through it in detail next week. Okay? All right, cool. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, I apologize for being late. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. And I will see you guys on Wednesday.